Hello and welcome to ECG a Day. Here we'll go through a single tracing to practice our approach to arrhythmia, and the discussion will be at an intermediate level. At this point, you might want to pause the video and give a shot at interpreting this ECG yourself, and then we'll discuss it shortly. So first I start with a general observation to orient myself to what we're looking at here. This is a single lead tracing, and we're given lead 2 here. And at the bottom here, we have a zoomed out version that shows many beats surrounding the arrhythmia. This is very common for Holter monitors where the tech who is going through the tracings is marking certain areas of the tracing for review, and you have the opportunity using the zoomed out view to see what's happening around this arrhythmia. And looking at the tracing, we have 2 beats of sinus rhythm at the beginning, and then we have the initiation of sustained, regular, wide complex tachycardia. So the main problem here is a wide complex tachycardia. The approach to any arrhythmia problem is to start with a general differential diagnosis and use observations to narrow this differential. So as for any wide complex tachycardia, the differential is VT, SVT with aberrancy, pre-excitation, pacing, and artifact. And this point we can rule out pacing because I don't see any pacing spikes, pacing artifact. This is a fairly clean tracing, so I don't think this is noise, but it always could be, I suppose. There's another reason why this is not noise, which we'll cover later. And this is very unlikely to be pre-excitation. It's always possible, but at this point, quite unlikely. And certainly if we see sinus rhythm at the very beginning, the 2 sinus beats do not look pre-excited. So we're left with VT and SVT with aberrancy or with some sort of bundle branch block, and pre-excitation is quite low on the differential. So to distinguish the VT versus SVT with some sort of aberrancy, we have certain tools. Just to remind you, the first step is to look for P waves, and certainly if we see P waves within the tracing, that is a very powerful diagnostic tool. If you're seeing a V dissociation, especially if there is more V's than A's, it makes it almost certainly VT. And we also have the initiation here. So this is also an important tool. And unfortunately, we're very limited in our use of QRS morphology on a single lead tracing. However, there are some hints we can use, which we'll talk about. So first, let's take a look at the AV relationship. So looking for P waves within the wide complex tachycardia, I see some high frequency deflections within the ST segment of the T wave. I see it less well after certain QRS complexes. This is a very fast wide complex tachycardia, and when it's so fast, the QRS is often quite distorted. And it's often very hard to see little P waves within it. But it's fairly reasonably convincing. We often call it candidate P waves. And I see this little bump after each QRS. So even if they were P waves, this would be a 1-to-1 AV relationship tachycardia. And what that means is we basically could be either VT or SVT with aberrancy. Because, for example, this QRS can retroconduct and create a negative or a retroconducted P wave right after it. This is very plausible if this was VT. And if this was SVT, for example, some sort of atrial tachycardia, this P wave would conduct to the next QRS. So if you see a 1-to-1 AV relationship, it's generally not that helpful because it could be VT or SVT with aberrancy. Now there is a bit of wobble here, and we could measure out to see if A's lead V's or V's lead A's to see what's the dominant rhythm here. But interestingly, we have the initiation here, and it's often helpful to see how does it start. The first event of this tachycardia, the first early event, is this. Okay. And I know there's a P wave in there because I have a sinus T wave, and so I can template the sinus T wave with this T wave, and there's clearly an extra notch there that was not there before. So this is, and it's high frequency, it's much sharper than a T wave, so it must be some sort of a depolarization, so it must be a P wave, okay? Since it's a P wave, it's an early P wave, it's the first event of this tachycardia, it's a PAC. So this is a wide complex tachycardia that initiates with a premature atrial contraction, and VT doesn't start with a premature atrial contraction. It's extremely rare, kind of a case reports. In case reports it does, but for the most part, if you see a wide complex tachycardia initiating with an A or with a PAC, it'll almost certainly be an SVT with some sort of a bundle branch block. Okay, and so this led me down the SVT diagnosis. The P waves themselves aren't terribly helpful. But another useful hint here is oftentimes with Holters you get a strip at the bottom which gives you kind of like a zoomed out view of the rhythm, and as you can see, this rhythm starts off wide initially, and then at some point it becomes narrow. Okay, in this component here it's narrow. So whenever a wide complex tachycardia goes to narrow, your differential includes one tachycardia transitioning to a different mechanism, or most commonly it'll be the same mechanism. Okay, so just by probabilistically, what are the chances that there's two tachycardias here? I mean, it's slightly lower. The most likely explanation is the simplest one, which is that this is one tachycardia, the same mechanism, and there's some sort of aberrancy of bundle branch block initially. And then if the rate slows, a little bit of adrenergic drive or something that the conduction down the non-functioning bundle recovers and it narrows suddenly. So this would be, I mean, this is not a slam dunk on this little rhythm at the bottom, but this certainly would be compatible with an SVT with aberrancy. So the main learning point here is that a wide complex tachycardia that initiates on an A is most likely SVT, because VT almost never initiates with a PAC. For those who want a more detailed dive into an expert approach to wide complex tachycardia diagnosis, I suggest you review my video in the description, and hope you enjoy this week's practice ECG. Have a great day.